They've offered a progressive agenda that includes everything but progress. They're responsible for the slowest economic recovery ever, the biggest debt increases ever, a massive tax increase on the middle class, the relentless buildup of the regulatory state, and the swift, mindless drawdown of a military that was generations in the making.
Jeb Bush is in, or as he'd like to be called, just call me Jeb. He is the 11th Republican to jump into the race. He made the announcement a couple hours ago at Miami-Dade College, and as you heard, he wasted no time going after the Democrats. Now, at Hillary's big announcement this past Saturday on Roosevelt Island, she slammed Jeb and his party.
These Republicans trip over themselves, promising lower taxes for the wealthy and fewer rules for the biggest corporations, without regard for how that will make income inequality even worse. We've heard this tune before, and we know how it turns out.
Now, if you're interested, and I know it is only June, in a head-to-head, the two are actually pretty close, according to this recent poll, and Jeb Bush does better than all the rest of the Republican field head-to-head against Hillary, still albeit on the short end of the stick. Now, he waited to join the race, did Mr. Bush here, largely because he was focusing on raising money, raised a lot of cash, but in the interim, or as a consequence, you could argue, lost a lot of momentum and obviously trying to get it back. He really tried today, Scott, to be more emotive. People thought he was too reserved, that he had some passion. I know it was tough to tell from that clip, but that was the passion, Jeb Bush. And the sign Jeb, as if people are going to forget the last name. He tried to say, I'm my own man today. Can he reboot the thing? Certainly he can win this thing. I'm not saying he couldn't, but can he reboot it and get the momentum that he had before when he was the front runner, and if so, how?
Well, I think so. I think today's announcement is the first step. You know, you get a boot from that in any event. And I think he hit a lot of things I thought that were important. And so I give him credit. Now, I did not hear the whole speech, I must say. I just read and heard parts of it. But I think he did a lot of things to try to pull together what the thematic presentation he'll make over the next several months. And the one thing that I like that he really does emphasize is the executive side. Folks don't realize it's different being an executive than a legislator.
He stressed that today. He said, I was a governor. I wasn't just some appointment.
That's right. So take that, Marco Rubio, take that, you know. And I think that's an important, I think you'll see that come up over and over again in both the Democratic and Republican primaries. Then answer your question, I think he'll come back up. I think he really appealed to Latinos.
Well, there was an exchange. I'm sorry I can't show it, but I'm curious. Those protesters in there, dreamers, right, for the DREAM Act, and they were screaming. He went off script, and that's always dangerous to Jeb, but he went off the prompter and looked at him and said, if when I'm elected, or basically when I'm elected, I will deal with immigration reform. Now, that's counter to the rest of the folks. So everybody seems to agree he'd probably give Hillary the best challenge in a general, but can he get out of the primary? Does he almost have to decide now, I'm going to publicly buck my party on certain issues, or can he hope kind of the field will kind of, with enough infighting, he'll be the last adult standing? I
think the former, and I think you're right. And I think he said that. You know, I'm not as interested in the primary. I'm talking about what I believe in. I think that's going to go a long way. You know, you got the Huckabees, you got all these folks who are going to try right of right, and he's going to say, look, I've got these different views on it. And the other thing that's interesting about him is he's not afraid to talk about it. A lot of folks, Scott Walker has been identified as one, don't want to talk about the social issues, don't want to talk about that stuff, just the economy, what have you. And I think Bush presents a lot of strengths there, both as an executive and a person willing to talk about those things.
On the left, Andrew, on Roosevelt Island, Hillary definitely made an attempt, and the headlines largely said she tried to stress the progressive roots, the imagery, obviously, Roosevelt, not just FDR, but obviously Eleanor Roosevelt, too. She was making that point. How much does she have to do to quell not a threat to lose the primary, but to bring the left back on board here so she doesn't have to have a fractured argument for a while and she can focus just on the general?
I don't think she has to do that much. She has to walk and chew gum and not fall down and have her campaign get off to a decent start and show that she's a viable candidate. She still knows what she's doing. And she's not putting herself in some position where she's going to embarrass the party if it gets to a general election. I honestly think for both Hillary and Jeb, the strong suit is, I can win this general election. I think that's the biggest selling point for both of them. And as long as she can show that, especially on the Democratic side, she'll defeat her challengers and the progressive left will come running back, especially when confronted with whomever the conservative Republican is who winds up as her opponent.
But Andrew, she was so left. She was more left than Obama was in her speech on some issues. I mean, she wasn't going moderate or middle.
It's because I think she's sensed that the middle of the country has moved left. We've talked about this to a certain degree. I think the country, which we had always talked about being a center-right country, is now either down the middle or even moving center-left, especially on economic issues. Income inequality, wealth disparity, the sense that the game is rigged. That's hitting home for a lot of people who aren't progressives
to that
on
point,
an
though,
economic
Dom,
level.
is she going to have to start saying, me and the president aren't on the same page?
At
Whether
some
it's
point, yes.
on foreign policy
At some point,
and
yes.
with trade? I mean,
At some point, yes, I agree with Andrew's assessment. The country, to a degree, is moving a bit towards center left, but at the same time, she's energizing the base. The point where we disagree, she doesn't have to. All she has to do is energize. She is the Democratic nominee, and she's only a heartbeat away from the presidency right now. Jeb Bush, as I've long contended, is the only Republican out there, Richard, that has a shot at beating her, but he's going to get trapped up in the nomination process.
And she did pull away a little bit from Obama with her discussion about the trade agreement.
Yep.
Siding with Pelosi for the first time.
and also on the subject of what to do with ISIS, too. I mean, it's going to be a really interesting balance of the summer. Won't decide the election, but certainly will start shaping what kind of candidates there'll be in the general, whoever emerges. All right, we want to get you involved in our conversation. Head over to Facebook and Twitter and sound off on a question tonight. Which last name carries more political baggage, Clinton or Bush? Coming up next, our Hudson Valley headlines.